Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simple Electronics podcast, and I'm your host, Dan, from the Simple Electronics YouTube channel. And with me today, I've got a very special guest, Scotty from Strange Parts. How are you, Scotty?
I'm good. How's it going, Dan?
It's going great. I mean, sitting across from another YouTuber I respect with awesome content, which I am, I don't think jealous, envious. There we go, envious of. And I'm
Well,
just really
thank you.
glad you had time to sit down with me. And it's no problem. It's well earned. Um,
Thanks.
just,
Yeah, I'm glad we could chat here. It's great to be on.
just in case my audience have been sitting underneath a rock for the last 5 or 6 years, can you just tell us who you are and a little bit of what you do?
Sure. My name's Scotty, and I run a YouTube channel called Strange Parts. And I would say that that my vision for the channel is sort of the intersection of technology, travel, and adventure. And I got my start when I was living in Shenzhen, China. I ran across the crazy idea to try and build my own iPhone from parts that I bought in the cell phone repair markets in China, and spent 5 months doing that and making what essentially was a short documentary film about that, and that went crazy viral on YouTube, and all of a sudden I was a full-time YouTuber. So full-time YouTube creator. So, the rest has been kind of just riding that ride. I've done a lot with modifying iPhones and a lot of going inside factories in China and showing people what factories are like. And then since COVID, I haven't, I came back to the US for Christmas in 2019, and I haven't had a chance to go back yet. So I've been sort of adapting my content for what I can do here in the US.
I mean, I feel like it's coming soon, though, because the world is slowly
Yes.
returning to a normal. So
Yep.
that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I think we're getting pretty close to me being able to go back to China. I'm guessing by like end of the year or early next year that's a reality. So I can't wait.
We can expect some more perusing the markets in some
Yes.
point in the next year or two, then, for sure.
Yes, I think so. And some more factory tours. I'm really eager to start doing factory tours again. So, I'm just in the early stages of talking to factories here in the US. And then as soon as I can go back to China, I'll go back and do some factory tours there.
So let's start in the beginning, because most YouTubers that base themselves around a concept, they're in that concept and then they decide to make a video about it, and then they move
Sure.
into that area. Makes it a lot easier. But you went the other way. You were in Shenzhen first and then made a video. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So uh, I have a background as a software engineer, and I started my own company called App Monster in 2010. And around 2015, I decided I didn't want to run that business full time anymore. And so I handed that off to my second in command and the team, and they continued to run it. And I was looking for my next entrepreneurial adventure. I had gone nomadic around that time too. So I had put all my stuff in storage, and I was traveling full time. And I had the idea that, this is kind of at the early end of IoT, when IoT was starting to get hot. I think before we even really had that sort of name for it. But I had this concept that, maybe I'd start a company that blended my love for electronics and software. I was a trained software engineer, but I'd always been an electronics hobbyist. And so I'd kind of heard through the nomad grapevine that Shenzhen was the place to be when it came to manufacturing electronics. And so I decided that, I would go up there and kind of get a lay of the land and figure out how one would go about manufacturing electronics, and in the process, hopefully get some inspiration for, what product I was going to build. And so I went up there and was just blown away. I mean, the markets are awesome. There are factories everywhere. I fell in with this great group of open source hackers that was kind of loosely organized by Ian Lesnet from Dangerous Prototypes, who makes the Bus Pirate. And we'd get together every night for barbecue and drink beer, and everybody would talk about either what they'd found in the markets that day, or the trials and tribulations they'd had at the factory that day, because a lot of people were manufacturing open source hardware. just learned a ton by sitting at those. I had, pages and pages of notes from those barbecue sessions.
So you're in Shenzhen and you're a little bit of a nomad. So I'm guessing it's
Yep.
like living in hotels and hostels or stuff like that. I know traveling in China is a bit different.
Yes, it's a challenge.
Because yeah, and you did shoot from your hotel room, so you were in hotels at some point.
Yes.
But then when do you go? You know what would be cool? I could probably build an iPhone out of just parts I find in the market. When does this happen to you?
Yeah, the idea for building my own iPhone came out of one of those nights at barbecue. Someone from the British Council came to dinner one night. They were in town for a couple weeks. And she said, I've been walking through the markets. The way the markets are laid out, you have to walk through the cell phone repair markets, or at least buy them, to get to kind of what I call the main markets, which is where you can buy, random components and buttons and switches and things like that. And the market dynamics have been such that the main markets have been kind of in decline for a while, right? If you want to buy chips, the reality is it's much easier to buy them online than it is in person. And at the same time, the cell phone repair markets have just been going gangbusters, right? I mean, it's just crazy busy. But none of us at barbecue understood anything about the cell phone markets. We understood the main component markets. And those were, it took a little bit to understand, but sort of out in the open, you could understand it. Unless you were a cell phone repair person, the cell phone markets were just incredibly opaque. So she said, I walked through the cell phone markets, and I think there are enough parts there that you could build your own phone. And she bought a screen and a couple of other things. And I said, that's a great idea. And then she went back to England, and kind of nobody in that circle, she didn't seem to do anything with it. Nobody in the circle did anything with it. And I said, 9 months later, I still, this idea is still poking around in the back of my brain. I said, that's a great idea. And, I wonder if I can go do that. And so, I tried to think. I was sort of in entrepreneur brain, right? So I thought, well, if I go spend a bunch of time figuring this out, like, what's the product that's going to come out of it? And I couldn't really figure that out. I had some ideas, but they seemed, maybe a bit dodgy. And so I had been playing around with video at that point. I had bought a little RX100, which is kind of like a high-end point and shoot that fits in your pocket. And I'd been playing around with that because I was just so blown away by Shenzhen. It was so different from my image of what China was. It was so much bigger and more advanced, and there were just all these sort of awe-inspiring things everywhere I went, from factories to just walking down the street to the markets. And so I said, maybe the output of this process of figuring this out and of this sort of adventure into figuring out how the markets work is telling a story, right? Is making a video. And originally I thought it was going to be a series of sort of vlogs. And I'd seen Ian very successful with his electronics business, Dangerous Prototypes, in making free content. So, Ian's a really strong writer. He wrote for Hackaday. And so that was his main output. But he also had kind of dabbled in videos. And he'd come to the conclusion that videos weren't really worth his time, that they take so long to make that, he was much better off writing blog articles. But I kind of, got that idea in my head of if you put out a lot of free content, you can drive, you can build an audience that's excited about you, and then you can sell them cool stuff. And Ian was doing that very successfully with his Bus Pirate and a whole bunch of other, public domain designs that he designed. And so I thought, well, maybe I can make a video about this iPhone process, and maybe that's a start to, kind of a marketing channel for my new, electronics company, whatever that ends up being. And so I just kind of dived in. I'd never really done any serious video production, and I kind of just dived in. I started with my, combination of my phone and this little RX100, and I just started shooting, and I was terribly embarrassed, and I was getting all sorts of looks on the street, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I don't speak a ton of Chinese, and I was kind of just wandering around the markets day after day after day, learning little bits and nuggets from watching what was going on. And I did a couple months of that, and then Chinese New Year hit. And if anybody doesn't know, Chinese New Year is this kind of it's this really interesting phenomena. Imagine for like an American, imagine if Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's were all one holiday that lasted like 2 to 3 weeks. So you have kind of all the family obligations and the like food and the like drinking and the partying and the fireworks are all this one big holiday that everybody goes home for. And that last piece is the most significant, which is that it is the largest modern human migration in the world right now. So Shenzhen is a city of 17 million, and 85% of those leave for 2 to 3 weeks around Chinese New Year. It just empties out.
It becomes empty.
Yeah, and it happens in the matter of a couple days. And all of the flights are booked, like internally in China. All of the trains, all of the buses, like there's no transport. So and none of the restaurants are open. Like it's a ghost town. There are no taxis. Like it just empties out. And so all of the foreigners leave and go somewhere else, because it's just not very practical to stick around. And so I had all this raw footage, and I thought I was going to be editing along the way, and that didn't happen. And so I went down to Bali and hung out in a like a co-working space down there, and just sat and edited and put together what turned into. Well, I was trying to figure out these episodes, and a friend recommended, well, why don't you make a trailer first? And that trailer turned into the video that the first video on the channel, which is how I made my own iPhone in China, and that blew up, and it's done like 25 million views now. And once I hit that point, it was very clear I needed to focus on making more content, not on building electronics. So, I still would love to build electronics and sell them as part of Strange Parts, but I'm only now finally getting to the point where I feel like I've got an understanding of how to do both. So I'm looking forward to that.
That video is just so cool. If you're the type of person that doesn't like compliments, just put your fingers in your ears. But this video, if I were to put it into words, it's like this delicious combo of sort of like sort of like on off the cuff sort of filming, vlogging, sort of explaining what's going on as you go, the trial, the error. It's like it's a story in 5 parts. The whole thing is actually a masterpiece. So I don't know how you put that together as your first video.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it was a lot of just sort of, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stuck. I got a lot of helpful feedback from friends, and I actually got a lot of opportunity. It's only recently that I've sort of figured out this is what I was doing, but how like I've been listening to a lot of stand-up comic podcasts recently, like Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura and those sort of folks. And so I've been hearing a lot about how professional stand-up comics work on material. And one of the big things they do is they go to, whatever their local, comedy club is, and they just kind of work out ideas on stage and see what resonates. And, as storytellers, we don't necessarily, a lot of YouTube creators I'm friends with, like we might share ideas with each other, but we don't have that. But inadvertently, I had that space to work out ideas at barbecue and at the co-working space where I was, people would ask, well, what are you working on, or how is it going? And I'd have a chance to sort of tell my story over and over. And we had kind of this rotating door of people coming into Shenzhen for a couple of weeks to visit, and they'd come to barbecue. And so I had these constant opportunities to be retelling the story over the course of months. And so I got really good. Like I had kind of refined this story the way a stand-up comic would on stage to be the most salient points, and figured out like what resonated with people and what didn't. And so I think that really helped. And it's actually something I miss a lot right now, is having that sort of constant audience and constant new audience to sort of retell the same story to while I'm working on it. So I think that really helped. And then, just kind of grinding on it and just being like taking my software engineering brain, which is sort of like, if you think about things like code reviews, right, of just like refining code over time and like coming in and, kind of roughing things out and then coming in and refining and then refining and then refining and refining. I kept doing that on this story, and it's turned out really well. There's a million things about it that I would go back and change now that I've,
No,
4 or 5
you're not
years
allowed.
in, and like,
No
well,
revisions.
I would love to come in and remaster it, because like my audio skills and my like color correction skills and things like that were really lacking. And there are a bunch of pieces about it that like, it could just look a lot nicer without changing any of the cuts. So at some point that might happen.
Do you know who Dave Jones is?
I do. From EEV blog. Yes.
Yep. So he constantly says it's YouTube. It has to feature you. And the fact that it's imperfect makes it perfect. It's not a Hollywood production. It's some guy wandering around the Shenzhen markets who honestly probably didn't think of himself as someone who was capable of finishing this product, to have a finished iPhone when he set out for this, but he did it anyway. That is the brilliant part. It doesn't. I think the fact that it's shot by yourself in adverse conditions, because if I'm not mistaken, it's not kosher to film openly in the Shenzhen markets, right?
Yeah, folks don't like it when you roll in with a big camera, so I keep it pretty low key in there.
And so, because I remember some of your videos,
and I try and be really ethical about how what I do with that video and how I show it, because there are real concerns. Like the sellers in the markets kind of want to keep their heads down and like don't want to be made an example of. So I try really, really hard to honor that, and not show anybody's face who not only doesn't like say that that's okay, but also that I have a good sense, like has the context to make an educated decision there. Because there are a lot of Chinese folks that don't really understand YouTube or anything like that, and may not have a sense of like how big a channel I have now. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Try to be real careful about that.
And then Apple pissed off everyone shortly after that video.
Yes.
And removed the headphone. You knew where this was going. Removed the headphone jack. I think is in the iPhone 6, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember.
They removed it in the 7. So the 6S had
7
headphone jack, and the 7 did not. Yeah.
And you said, "Hold my beer. I'm going in."
Yep.
And
well, I got a number of comments on the iPhone video that were like, "Hey, you should bring the headphone jack back." And I was like, I still really like having wired headphones. I had not gotten on the Bluetooth bandwagon yet. I finally have, but it took a while. I had these great like in-ear headphones that I just wore everywhere, and they were wired. And so, I really still wanted to be able to use those, but I also wanted to be able to get a 7 so that I could have the upgraded camera, because I was shooting on my phone a lot. And so I said, let's give it a shot. And, I had this intuition that it would be possible. And the main blocker was like, is there going to be enough space inside this phone? And so there's a really like nice pivotal moment of that video where I found this like piece of plastic that, doesn't really do very much. That's just kind of taking up the space where the headphone jack would be. And, it has one function, which is it sort of holds there's a membrane that is air permeable but not water permeable that helps equalize the pressure inside the phone to the outside pressure, as you go up and down in altitude, so that the barometer works properly, and so that you don't like blow out a seal or something. And but it's a very large piece of plastic for what it's holding in. And that's, I took that out and said, I don't need this phone to be waterproof anymore. And, that's where the headphone jack went.
And you sort of, I'm thinking back here because I watched that video on release, because I found your video, your channel from your first video. But if I'm not mistaken, you sort of took a shortcut, and I'm saying this very loosely because it didn't make it easy by any means. But you used, I think it was an Apple dongle to turn the regular port into a headphone jack, and you disassembled it, took the little chip that was inside a little flex cable and you plug that in, so it acts as though you were plugging in headphones into the actual port of the phone.
Exactly.
Which is incredible. Like, how did you, like, I don't even have the mental capacity to reason this far. And there you are, and you did it. You got it done.
I'm not sure that the mental leap is really that far. I knew that I didn't want to be doing any really hardcore engineering if I could get away with it, right? Like, you know, they say that, you know, one of the three best qualities of what are the three qualities of a programmer? Laziness, hubris, and I forget what the third one is. But, you know, I definitely will try and find the lazy way out if I can. And there are a bunch of hurdles that if you were to do it not the lazy way, you'd have to face, right? You have to face the Lightning protocol. You have to face MFI, which is manufactured for iPhone, which is the like cryptographic chip that
is that what MFI means? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I thought it was fancier than
that. It's a licensing program, right, for things that plug into the Lightning port, and so you need to be a registered developer with Apple. You need your hardware approved by them, similar to the app approval process, and you need to get a chip. You need to buy a chip from them for every single device that you make that has this like cryptographic whatever on it. So I definitely didn't want to go down that road. And then also you have all of the like audio protocol, like DAC stuff that you need to deal with, right? Because there's no audio lines on a Lightning. You know, Lightning is essentially USB under the cover, right? With some additional like handshake. And so I didn't want to touch any of that if I could get away with it. And so it was like, well, what out there already exists that, you know, does all of these things? And there's a Lightning to audio jack, you know, adapter that everybody was buying early in the iPhone 7. They might have even bundled one with, they had one in the box on iPhone 7. Okay. And the reason I know that is because I was going through those adapters constantly, right? Like I probably went through 20 or 30 of those adapters because I was tearing them apart to get the board inside the Lightning connector. There's actually a small PCB that has all of the electronics that we just talked about. The MFI, the Lightning, the DAC, all of that is in the Lightning plug itself. And for a little while, and I don't remember what shows in the video, but the real story is that I first went around I first got one or two, I think, from the Apple Store. There is one Apple Store, like official Apple Store in Shenzhen. And then I went around the markets and I got all of the the knockoff ones, including there were some like knockoff splitters that you could plug in Lightning and then had an audio jack and you could plug in another Lightning cable. And that way you could charge and listen to music at the same time. And because that was one of the goals, was like, how do I make this thing so that you can use both the headphone and the Lightning jack? And I didn't succeed at that. There were some paths to it. I ended up with like an official Belkin one, but all the market like knockoff stuff didn't work very well. And it looked like Apple was working pretty hard on like an iOS software update basis to try and prevent those guys from succeeding. But there was like a Belkin one, but it was huge. It was massive. And getting that, you know, preferably I wasn't spinning my own boards here, you know, trying to replicate others' PCBs, and their board was just massive. You know, it was like the width of the bottom of the phone. And I was going, there's no way. So anyway, I ended up really needing these OEM Lightning to headphone jacks, but they were expensive at the Apple Store. I forget. I think they were like, I don't know, $20, $30, something like that. And so I just, you know, kept exploring through the markets and asking around and asking for like, you know, how can I get OEM original Apple adapters? And I eventually found that you could get them at like, I forget, maybe they were like $10 in the Apple Store. I think I was getting them for like $7. And I was getting these original ones, and I kind of eventually figured out that where they were coming from was, so one of the things that happens, there's a lot of smuggling across the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And if you go look, there are some amazing news articles about things like zip lines across the river. There's a canal that divides the border, and people were stringing up zip lines at night across the border and sending baskets full of iPhones across the border. And the reason is that iPhone is considered a luxury good in China, and so has like a 30% tax on it, luxury good tax, something like that. So, but in Hong Kong, there was no tax like that. And so you could simply go to an Apple store in Hong Kong, of which there are a number, buy an iPhone, bring it back to China, and sell it for a profit, and still sell it for less than the tax markup, than you would buy at the official Apple store. And so there were a lot of new phones coming across the border from Hong Kong at the time. And in fact, like there were so many coming across the border, it was actually really hard to buy a new iPhone in Hong Kong because there were just people standing outside the Apple stores all night to be the first ones in the door to buy them to bring across the border to Shenzhen. And so they were just selling out every day for months and months and months and months and months. Well, when you buy a new iPhone, you get all of the accessories that are with it. And Chinese people, being the like shrewd business people they are, there's just this like deep focus on how can we squeeze every last penny out of something. So they were not selling the phones in their boxes with their accessories. They were parting it all out. And so you could buy the phone separately, and there's an incredible market around, buying phones like that. Prices change daily. It's very interesting. But you could also buy the accessories, and I was buying the accessories at like 75% of what the like sticker price was, and I was buying them like 10 at a time. These
nice.
Original headphone adapters that were just in the boxes with new iPhones coming out of Hong Kong or wherever else.
I feel like I remember you breaking a couple in the video, trying to, either that or you were trying to lift the chips. I'm not 100% sure if that's what it was, but there was some damage being caused, which I feel like is very important to show in a video like this because, I mean, again, the story is not how you're some high-level hardware engineer that
I'm not
super easily did everything. Like, I love the fact that we were along for the ride with you.
Yeah.
And obviously now you have acquired all these skills, but it was so sweet to see you acquire them in front of our eyes. Like, that was awesome. The first time you plug in a battery on that first iPhone, or the first time you plug in your headphones on the iPhone with the new jack, the elation on your face is real. I felt it. I was
absolutely
there with you, which I think is so important. So that's, again, your storytelling is just top notch.
Well, thanks. It's, I look a lot to, the hero's journey, and I sort of adapt that to the engineer's journey or the hacker's journey, right? And they really map quite well. As engineers, we go through this process of the hero's journey, and the hero's journey has a bunch of pieces to it, right? That if folks aren't familiar, the hero's journey is kind of this storytelling model that's been around for a long, long time, hundreds or thousands of years. But it's also the basis for pretty much every like action movie ever made, right? So Star Wars is the one that's really typically referenced when you talk about hero's journey. But Lord of the Rings, pretty much. I'm sure I don't watch superhero movies, but I'm sure every single one of them is hero's journey.
Pretty much with an American slant.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a bunch of components to the hero's journey, right? There's a bunch of sort of like key pieces that make a very fleshed out hero's journey. You can go read this. There are books on it. But, there are things like they all have names, right? So there are things like the call to adventure, and the call to adventure. So the protagonist starts out in a normal world, in the ordinary world, and they go into this other sort of adventure world. And the key piece to that is the call to action. And then there's usually a refusal of the call where they say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to live my normal life. And then they change their mind and they accept the call, and then they go into this other world, right? So you can look at both of the videos we've talked about so far as a pretty strong mapping onto that model, right? There definitely were like refusals of the call early on, right? And I don't know that I told that super well as part of the story. There's some pieces that like work better like it's easier to do in a feature film length than in a YouTube length, right? Or, you know, I have a pretty hard time. Anything over like 30 or 40 minutes doesn't do very well on YouTube, or is hard to make do well.
Oh, yeah. I think that's what you mentioned in your newest video.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's a pacing issue as well. It's both like a time length and a pacing issue, which is things have to be very fast paced, particularly in the world of TikTok now, where people's, you know, are expecting that like instant payoff when they click on something. But, you know, before I did that video, there was definitely this like long period of, should I do this? Is this just going to be way too hard? You know, am I going to get stuck? Right. Like, and I think I go through that with just about every big project that I take on. You know, a factory tour, not so much, but, you know, any big engineering project, I'm kind of like, well, you know, like, and there's a period of sort of research of like, is this really going to be possible? Like how, you know, I need to at least see in my head how it might be possible before I'm willing to take it on, you know? So,
yeah, you know, I'm glad you did. I mean, at what point do you find yourself getting sort of attention from the big players that maybe you were watching at the time? Because I mean, you did do a video with Linus 4 years ago.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I don't think I was super steeped in YouTube culture when I first got started. And so a number of big folks reached out to me and I had no idea who they were. And like, I only barely knew who Linus was before we did that video, which I feel really ashamed to admit. But it's just the reality of like, you know, I was just running in different circles. The Linus thing happened just because I think it was one of his employees knew that he was in town. And was like, hey, you should hit up Scotty. Like it was right after I'd had, you know, it was pretty early on, right after like, I think I'd already done the headphone jack thing and maybe one or two others, but you know, the channel was blowing up. And so I don't remember if he reached out, I reached out, something. There was a few big YouTubers in town for this OnePlus launch. They had flown a bunch of folks in to kind of do factory tour type stuff. And so, you know, I'd shown a couple of them around the markets. And yeah, we made a Linus with video, we made a video with Linus and yeah, got to know him. He's a super nice guy. And he's been, you know, a great, supporter of the channel. He's really helped me over the years. So, that was super awesome.
I think he said some of his staff were fans of yours, which I mean,
yes.
I mean, it's pretty obvious. If you're in the tech space in, you know, a couple of years ago, there's no way you haven't heard of, you know, Strange Parts. There's just not, there's not a chance. You were run on basically, yeah, every like aggregator had you, every
I know, it was crazy.
Podcast was talking about you. I mean, and it's well deserved. It's fantastic. And then, I mean, to have Linus reach out to you and then you're like, yeah, let's do it. I mean,
yep.
That's the big thing.
Yep. It was wild too, because they're a pretty well-oiled machine. It was Linus and his camera guy, who I'm blanking on his name right now.
But they depends which one. He has a few. It might have been Edsel at the time.
No, it was. I'm drawing a blank, and I feel bad because we hung out a bunch.
That's okay.
But you know, they were rolling with a Red and like a big like field sound recorder and like, you know, lav mics and stuff. And that just doesn't, like, it's hard to get away with that in the markets. And even in like, so unfortunately we were kind of limited on where we could go. They ended up shooting, I got them to shoot on a cell phone because I was like, if you roll in here with a Red, like we're not going to get anywhere, you know? And so they still had like a bunch of audio gear sort of hanging out. I was like, you know, the market's like, you do best if you just kind of fly under the radar and don't draw a lot of attention. So, you know, it was a bit of an interesting video because of that, because we were pretty visible and we got shooed off by a security guard at one point, but it wasn't too bad.
Is he a bull in a china shop in person, or is that a persona he put on for the video?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there were some real like stressors going on at that time, right? Like they had not been there for very long, so I'm sure he was still jet lagged. They like were very busy with OnePlus, and we only had a small amount of time. And we were supposed to have like better planned out a video idea, and I had spent the entire day prior, like well into the night, with a different YouTuber who was in town that we were supposed to be doing a collab in. Like, I don't know. I don't want to get too into that story, but like the plug got pulled on that at the last minute, and like it was this whole thing. So I was like underprepared walking in, which was totally on me, and I felt really bad about. And we had this initial idea that we'd go look at like weird Chinese laptops, and we just never really tracked those down. You know, Linus was like, show me some weird laptops, and it wasn't something I'd researched a ton of, and we just couldn't find them. And so Linus was like, well, we're gonna do what, you know, I want to get a video out of this, so we're gonna do what I always do when I need a video idea, which is we're gonna build a PC. And so, you know, we were just kind of, you know, trying to get through that. And I think Linus just wasn't very used to how the markets work. You know, he's used to buying stuff online. And so I think there was some frustration on his end with, you know, being on a time crunch, and sort of like, you know, people are running off to other booths, and there's, you know, getting not super clear answers on how much things cost and things like that. So
yeah, because I'm sure they're used to dealing mostly in volume, right? These sellers aren't really interested in selling a single tube, or
that is true. That's true or false depending on what it is. The booths where we were buying PC parts, I think they're pretty used to dealing in one-offs. If we were buying switches or ICs, then yeah, it's not uncommon for certain parts to just, like, if you only want one or two, to get them for free as a sample, rather than being asked to pay for them, because the assumption is that you're getting a sample to make sure that it works with your design, and then you're going to come back and buy 10,000. And, you know, it's actually, for people listening, it's really important that you not take advantage of that, and that, you know, you try and pay. If you really only want one or two or 5 or 10, that you pay, because those guys aren't going to, you know, they're assuming they're going to make a lot more money off of you, and you don't want to take advantage of that. But for the PC parts, you know, like, it's PC parts, there may be a markup, and you're you know, you can bargain and all of that. For one-offs, little parts, we don't bargain in the markets. Everybody that I know, because they're doing you a favor by selling it to you. You know, you're not even worth the time to talk to.
Can you maybe speak to, because there is this thing, right, where tourists go in and they don't really have a sense of what it's like to live in Shenzhen. Can you just explain what a sale of, you know, 10 switches for $1 might mean to a seller, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot less than you'd think, right? I think a lot of people come in with this idea of like, everybody in China is super poor, and you know, every little dollar they make is a big, you know, a big win for them. The reality is that sellers may be paying, and it's come down, but the reality is, like, just having a booth in the market is quite expensive. There are booths in the market, you know, some of the booths are only like the width of a sort of glass countertop. And it used to be, I'm fuzzy on the numbers, I think it used to be like a simple glass countertop could be as much as like $1,000 a month, just
Holy
for the
crap.
rent. I know Tool Brothers, which have featured in a number of my videos, who run a tool booth in the cell phone markets. I think they pay like multiples of that, like $4,000 a month, something. They have a bigger booth, but it might even be more than that. I forget. But it's real money for a very small amount of space. And so a lot of the booths in the sort of component markets, you know, there are a lot of brokers in there that are just buying and selling, but there are a lot of booths that represent a factory. And so they're essentially the factory rep in this year-round trade show, if you will. And it used to be that the market's purpose was to serve the factories. So the factories would, you know, get an order to make something, and they would, it's there's a lot of contract manufacturing, right? So it's not necessarily the factory designed the product; it's the factory got an order from a customer to make something, and then they would go to the markets to track down all of the parts that they needed. And with the advent of the internet and online marketplaces, that's just not the main way that factories are sourcing parts these days. Although I would love to be there right now during the chip shortage, because I bet the markets are bananas right now. I bet there's all sorts of interesting things happening there.
Bananas in which sense? Because I would think there would be fewer parts, right?
Sort of. So there are fewer new parts, but I bet there are a lot of used parts floating around the market right now. So there is one of my favorite places in the market I call the underground chip market, because it is both underground in the physical sense. It is below the street level, and it's literally below the street. And it is also underground in the sense that, like, there's a lot of things happening there that are not above board sale of new chips. I won't say that it's like criminal in any way. I don't think it is. There probably is some. I mean, there's always a little bit in every market, anywhere in the world. But a lot of it is just like chip reclamation, right? So you'll see they take like one of those like pistol grip hot air guns that you would use for like peeling paint, and mount that in a stand so it points straight down. They'll turn it on and they'll just sit there and throw boards underneath it and pull them off with tweezers, right? Like the least like precise method of pulling chips off things. And then those chips often go through like a process of cleaning them up. So they'll, clean up the pads on them with a soldering iron. They'll take isopropyl to them and clean off the chips. Sometimes they'll even etch off the markings and remark them, and that's where things get a little dodgy. But they will often put them in trays and then resell them. And so it'll be things like memory chips. But you can buy, like, I've seen bags, like gallon Ziploc size bags full of like A7 chips off of iPhones, right? It almost looks like you could buy them by the pound, and they're in rough shape, and I just like those. I don't know what anybody does with them. Like, what do you do with a bag full of i7, iPhone chips? But the memory chips, like, definitely find their way back onto manufacturing lines. And, all the guys that I know that were doing manufacturing at the time, they wouldn't touch those with a 10-foot pole, because you don't know. I mean, you're not guaranteed that all of the chips work, right? And so, if you're putting those chips onto a board on a pick and place line, you're going to, let's say 5% of the chips are bad. Now, if you're only using one used chip for like a memory chip or something like that, now 5% of your boards are automatically bad. And so you have to rework 5% of your boards, right? But if you start incorporating multiple reclaimed chips, your error rate gets pretty bad pretty quickly.
So they'd be randomly distributed, right?
Right, exactly. So the chances that you have one bad chip out of 3, increases pretty significantly. And so I still don't have a great sense of where those are ending up, or I didn't at the time. I would talk to folks that are more experienced in manufacturing, and they'd say, well, they're ending up in like, kind of knockoffy, like Shenzhen products, like dash cams and things like that, where they're really trying to squeeze as much as they can out of the margin. And so if they can save 50% on memory chips, that may only be 25 cents or whatever, but that may be, a significant contributor to their margin. But I suspect now with the chip shortage, there are a lot more manufacturers out there that are willing to accept, dodgier parts, or I don't want to say dodgy in the sense of like that there's some sort of scam going on, but although I'm sure there are tons of scams, but also just, used chips and chips that aren't, in pristine shape, because people are really desperate.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is good though. Some recycling is good. It's just
absolutely
where it becomes dodgy. Yeah, where it becomes dodgy is when you don't know, when you think you're buying a brand new chip. That's the problem, because I'm all for.
I'm all for all of the reuse, and I don't mean to speak out against that at all. I think all of that activity is fantastic. I just sometimes wonder who is the recipient of those, and really just how do they make it successful, right? How do they take those chips and use them in a way that doesn't cost them more money than they're saving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because
And I
production
just
costs are a cost.
right,
I
and
mean,
having
they're
to
a
rework
significant cost.
boards or debug things or deal with returns, like those are can be significant costs in terms of labor.
Absolutely. And well, you know what? I have a bone to pick with you because
Okay.
when you agreed to this podcast, I had in my mind all these brilliant questions I would ask you. And then you go and release a new video where you went in a completely different direction
Yeah,
and it's not less interesting than your other stuff. So now what am I supposed to do? We're going to have to talk about your BattleBot. What
sure.
what inspired you? What I mean,
Yeah.
geez. Yeah, from the beginning if you
So,
can.
yeah. So, Greg, the team captain of Switchback, who's the guy with the big black beard, who appears pretty prominently in the video, is a good friend of mine from China, from barbecue in China, and he's actually probably the guy that I've learned the most about manufacturing from. His background is in mechanical engineering turned manufacturing engineer, and so he worked in the toy industry for a number of years. And then when I met him, he was in the early stages of starting his current company, which is Rev Robotics, which does they make components for FIRST robotics teams, the high school robotics competitions. And so when I first met him, he was there working on their first product, which I believe was a motor controller, and so he and I have hung out a bunch in China, and had kind of stayed in touch since then over COVID. And he said, he mentioned offhand, oh, by the way, like I'm working on fielding a BattleBots team and applying to be on the TV show. And I said, oh, can I come film, the building of the BattleBot? And he said, oh yeah, like you're welcome. And, do you want to just be on the team? And I said, sure. And so that kind of worked out to be this symbiotic thing where, one of my main contributions was helping them make their application video and featuring my face prominently in it, so that maybe we could get a little more attention from the showrunners to get accepted. And who knows how much that contributed, but it worked. We got in, and so then I went down to their warehouse in Dallas for better part of a month and hung out with them as we built the robot on sort of kind of nights and weekends sort of thing.
And you guys had a lot of the parts manufactured in the States, right? Like a lot of it was laser cut steel and stuff like that.
Yep, so a mixture. So Send Cut Send, which was a team sponsor, and they sponsor a lot of the BattleBots teams, does laser cutting of sheet metal. And so we got all our aluminum, vast majority of our aluminum and steel parts cut by them. And then did additional we welded up all the steel and a lot of additional machining, particularly on the aluminum. The AR500 is not very machinable, but we use that for our chassis. And then there was stuff out of China. Greg got custom brushless motors made at one of his motor factories in China. And so there's a bit in the video talking about some hurdles, figuring out that the way they wind those motors, they actually bring all the winding wires all the way out to the leads. And, the winding wires are obviously covered in enamel. Well, the folks that were swapping out connectors on them didn't realize that. And so we had some problems with there being kind of open circuits where there shouldn't have been, because there wasn't good contact on the connectors against the crimped connectors against the enamel wires. And then I think we were using some Chinese motor controllers, some like VESC copies for a while. And I don't remember whether we ended up using those in the end or not. I know on camera we blew up several, and I can't remember what actually went into the robot in the end. But yeah.
Yeah, I see lots of people blowing up those VESC ESCs.
Yeah.
I think just the unfortunate part is when you're driving a large brushless motor, you have the option to go with a VESC, which is, somewhere here up in Canada, a knockoff one will cost you about $150.
Yep.
And the next step up is something that you would use in like a golf cart almost, and that thing is like $600. So it's
Right.
like either you risk a couple VESCs or you get a boutique manufactured or a fancy speed controller. So I feel the pain. I definitely feel the pain on that one.
Well, and budget is a real concern on these robots. Just the bar is high enough now to be competitive. You really have to spend a lot of money, right? And it's definitely a case of engineers optimizing everything they possibly can. Our budget, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was somewhere around 40,000 for us to compete. Just in terms of parts and robots, not in terms of travel or anything, but for us to compete on the last season was about 40 grand. And there were teams there that were spending upwards of 85 grand.
Holy.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. So, it's like, if you look at the show, that's millions of dollars of robots that were paid for by the builders, not by the production company. Like, you get a little bit of money for competing, but it doesn't cover your nut to field a team by a long shot. And so you end up getting sponsors like SendCutSend to kick in money. And we had SendCutSend and Xilinx and SolidWorks and Strange Parts was a sponsor. Rev was a sponsor. And I'm probably forgetting one or two. But it's really crucial to be able to put on a team like that. And so, you're looking at really expensive batteries, motor controllers are crazy expensive. Generally you're running some sort of custom motor. And then just tons of machining and laser cut metal and things like that. We made our own wheels from scratch. So you got all the materials for that. And the piece that a lot of people don't realize on top of all of that is you're not building just one robot. If you show up with a single robot, chances are you won't make it all the way through the competition. The robots, even robots that win get a fair amount of damage. And so we showed up with 3 full robots, and that's pretty typical for any team that wants to be competitive. They all look the same. And then you also have like all of these additional attachments and configurations that, you know a bit in advance who you're competing. Usually like within 24 hours of fighting, you know who you're competing against. And you may want to really reconfigure the design of your robot depending on what bot you're up against, and what their design is. So, additional forks and, we could change our weapon configuration, all of this. Well, all of this costs money. So, it's, so, when we're talking about the difference between a $150 motor controller and a $600 motor controller, you multiply that times, you have to have, we had to have 4 different motors in a robot, right? 2 wheels, the arm raising and lowering, and the weapon, right? That adds up real quick. And, times 3 robots, like, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars in just motor controllers. So
it's crazy. And I think that was one of the revelations that you made in the video that actually drew a gasp from me. I thought they were single robots that people would just fix between rounds, which I thought they were just brilliant, but no, it's multiple robots. And I don't know if I'm a better person for knowing now, or if I'd rather go back to a world where I didn't know
a little too much how the sausage is made. It's there are definitely a bunch of, and it's not to say that there aren't people fixing robots. We were, it's a 2-week like shooting period for the competition, and there's an entire pit area where each team has their own pit, and we had the advantage of every single person on the team except for me had competed in first. And so they were all really used to rolling out to a competition with all of the necessary things to maintain a robot. So we had one of the nicer pits because they just rolled out their first kit. And so it was, it's real friendly in the pits. People come over to borrow tools and things like that. And we were definitely one of the teams that had a lot of tools that were getting borrowed and used and stuff, which was awesome. Sorry, I've lost the train of thought here.
That's
repair.
fine.
So repair.
Yes,
So
there we go.
we are spending pretty much, you don't fight every day, right? I mean, we got 3 fights in the main season. And then I think it's came out last night. They did the champions bracket. So I think I can say, I don't even know. I don't know how many fights we got in that bracket. I'm not going to spoil anything.
We don't need to spoil it. No, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, and this is not coming out for another month. So we can say, I think we lost that fight. And so we got 5 fights total over the course of 2 weeks. But you're spending a lot of the time in between repairing bots, right? So even if we have another bot ready to go, every single time we're basically tearing the robot completely apart and putting it back together. The one that
makes
fought.
sense.
Yeah. And everybody else is pretty much doing the same thing. And God forbid you should do well. There was an amazing moment, and I am really bummed that it wasn't captured on camera. But there was an amazing moment where Witch Doctor, and I forget who they were up against, were prepping for the final fight, right? The title fight. And Witch Doctor is like out of working robots. Like they have like 2 hours to go, and they are frantically trying to cobble together a working robot. And it was this amazing drama. And I'm shocked that they didn't do a better job filming that. There were like no cameras in sight, but so on site, there's like, Lincoln set up a welding tent and had certified welders there, that could do welding repairs. Haas and Autodesk had some mills there, so you could get new parts milled. And then there was like an arrangement with McMaster Carr where McMaster was doing same day delivery twice a day to the pits from their facility in LA. So they were, if you ordered like by a certain time in the morning, you would get your order in the evening. And then if you ordered by a certain time in the evening, you'd get it the next morning. And they were having a courier drive out twice a day from LA to Vegas to bring parts to people for repair, which was pretty awesome. That
is awesome.
Yeah, that was like McMaster Carr. I'm a huge McMaster fan, and like that was definitely a piece of like McMaster magic.
I am a McMaster fan, but unfortunately, I only have an AliExpress budget, so you can definitely see where the
I hear that
disconnect is.
I am in a similar situation, but there are some things that, and there's particularly if you're blocked on a project, being able to go to McMaster and go, this is exactly what I want, and I'm going to get it tomorrow morning, and that's sometimes worth paying for me at least.
That's the one thing working at I work at I guess in the States, you guys would call it a community college. Here, we just call it college.
Sure.
It's a trade school, basically.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And when we buy stuff from education companies, like we'll have these stand engines, which just have all the functions of a vehicle. And it's just integrated in the stand. So you have, just picture an engine in a giant metal cradle with a gauge cluster and the key and the engine computer with all the breakouts, so you can test all the pins and stuff like that. But they use McMaster Carr parts on their things, like those you can buy like gears and belts and pulleys and just anything. And so when we design our own ones of those, a couple of the teachers have put together themselves. And they're looking at, I just wonder how we can, we need some sort of gear to flip this thing upside down so they can see the bottom of the engine. And I'm like, just go onto the ones that we have, read the part number off of it, and just order it from McMaster Carr. And it blew their minds that you can just order these parts like that.
Yeah,
like, literally anything you want, you just order it off McMaster Carr. It's one of those websites that has the potential to make dreams happen, as long as you're willing to empty your bank account, basically. It's insane.
Yep. Are you familiar with the term DFM, design for manufacturing?
Yes, but in a very high levels. Yeah, high level sense, just the
Sure.
sort of
So, I
like
mean,
the
just
broad
in case
strokes.
anybody else isn't, design for manufacturing is basically taking like a prototype of a product and re-engineering it to be the most conducive to be manufactured using modern manufacturing techniques, right? So, you may be going from like a 3D printed case to an injection molded case, which, injection molding requires a bunch of changes to sort of make the mold work and whatnot. And then there are a bunch of things that you might do on like a PCB to make it, assemblable on a pick and place machine. I a little while back heard the phrase "design for McMaster car,"
Oh god.
and it's the concept of designing something so that 100% of the parts can come from McMaster car for like rapid prototyping. And it's exactly what you're talking about, where they have such an extensive catalog that you can find pretty much everything you need. And so it was kind of this idea of like figuring out how to sort of change your design approach so that you could use things like T-slot aluminum rails or whatever McMaster car had, to make it so that you could spin a new iteration of whatever this product was or this design or this particular mechanic by placing a new ordered McMaster card and getting it overnight, and therefore iterate a lot faster, which I thought was really awesome.
I think that McMaster car is America's sort of version of the Chinese markets. It's just all online catalog.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's far more curated than the Chinese markets. I mean, the markets are like this organized chaos that is in many ways quite inefficient, right? One of the reasons I like McMaster is that I can go on there and find exactly what I want in about 5 minutes and have it on its way in the morning. The in-person markets in China, finding that same thing may take me half a day. If I don't know where to go look, it might take me quite a while to find the right booth with the right thing. The markets are actually much better. Like, I don't go to the markets to find a specific thing that I already know and I want, generally. Generally, I go to the markets to discover things that I don't otherwise know about, right? Or get things that may be hard to buy online, right? Like iPhone parts. And eventually, you make relationships in the markets, and then that helps you find the things that you want. But like, going the first time and looking for something in particular is a fool's errand. You're never going to find what you're looking for, but you're going to find 15 other things that are really cool and, inspire you to do other things. When I was in China, like I had, I had a chip broker in the markets, Andy, who I would go to, and then he would track things down for me, specifically when it came to components. And I had, I knew how to get things that I wanted in the cell phone markets. Kind of had a lay of the land of like where different parts were, and you could kind of wander around and just look under the glass and ask a few questions and find what you needed. But for just about everything else, I would order it online in China, right? AliExpress, not AliExpress. AliExpress is Western facing. Taobao, and 1688, which is sort of the like internal equivalent to Alibaba. And then there's a few others like JD, which is sort of more of like a better curated sort of Amazon experience. Taobao is sort of like a really chaotic version of eBay meets Amazon in that it's all independent sellers. It's not auction like eBay. It's all buy it now. But it sort of has the like breadth and depth of eBay. eBay meets Amazon, right? You can literally buy anything on Taobao. I had a friend buy 50 live geckos on Taobao to try and get rid of the cockroaches in his apartment.
I was just about to ask if you could buy a live chicken, and I guess the answer would be yes.
Yes, I'm sure you can. And one of the interesting things, particularly about Taobao in Shenzhen, is that if you're looking for like an electronic component or something along those lines, chances are it's already in the city. That's already in Shenzhen. And so when you buy it on Taobao, it can get there as quickly as 24 hours. It's coming across town on a motorbike. And so it's really not that inefficient. It's pretty quick.
We've like an hour already passed on this podcast,
Yeah,
which is sad because, you know, we've got so much more to cover. But if you have the time, I would like to cover
sure,
one last thing,
sure.
because I think I'm looking at it more as a, well, first of all, I'm curious, but also because it's a little bit of a public service, because you tragically you came back to the States to do a tour of something, if if I'm not mistaken, and then you had an accident. Do you mind
Yeah.
talking about that a little bit?
So it was actually while we were building the BattleBot. We
Oh,
were, yeah, we were in the warehouse, and it was my own fault doing something dumb. They had a metal pipe, like, I don't know, let's say 8 feet long aluminum pipe that was part of their trade show booth that was just kind of leaning up in the corner. And when I first showed up, I was working on another project there that still hasn't seen the light of day for a bunch of reasons I won't go into. They had kind of given me the corner of the warehouse, and they had one of those big pallet scales. It's like the size of a pallet. It's made out of steel, and you can drop a pallet on it and tell you how much it weighs for shipping. Well, I stood that up on edge and stuck it between the wall and one of those pallet racks, and the pipe was behind it. And so as I was sticking it in there, the pipe fell over and didn't hit me or anything, and I didn't think much more of it. I kind of just crammed it all in there. Well, when I went to go pull the pallet scale out so we could weigh the BattleBot, that pipe came back and clocked me in the head, and in the back of the head. And I'd had one bad concussion before, and I pretty quickly know within a few minutes. It didn't knock me out or anything, but I pretty quickly knew I had a concussion. And so, I went and got a CT scan at the ER, and they said, well, nothing, doesn't look like any structural damage. Go rest, and it should heal. And I was just real concussed, and it just never really got much better. It got a little bit better over the next 6 months, but I was in pretty bad shape. I was like, for a while I couldn't drive. I was like getting nauseous riding in the passenger seat with my eyes open, just looking at the oncoming scenery. I was having a hard time making decisions. I was slurring speech. Like, it was not good. I ended up having to leave New Mexico. I was living in New Mexico at the time, and I ended up having to leave because I couldn't get access to any specialty healthcare, pretty much any healthcare at all. There just aren't enough doctors in New Mexico, particularly specialists. It was like 4 to 6 month waiting times to get in to see a neurologist. So I ended up moving up to Colorado and started to get a little bit better healthcare. And then I put out a video saying that I had this concussion, and kind of an amazing thing happened. I got an email from the like social media manager / online, or like marketing manager of a top concussion clinic that I was already aware of and was like trying to get into, but they had a huge waiting list. And he said, "Oh, I'm such a fan of your channel. I think we're the perfect solution for you. If you'd be up for it, I'd love to get you in here for an fMRI scan free of charge. And we'll see if it's a good fit." And we talked a little bit more. And they said, "Hey, if you're willing to do a video and kind of just show what your experience is, we'd love to have you here, and we'll cover the cost of treatment." And I said, "Well, that sounds awesome," because I already thought highly
sold,
of you guys.
right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we discussed a bunch, because I didn't want to be in a situation where if it didn't work, I couldn't be open about that. So we really carefully talked through with them, hey, like, and they were very on board with that. They said, "Hey, we just want you to be honest. We already know our treatment is good. You don't have to talk us up. Just be honest. We just want to get the word out there that there is better concussion treatment to be had, because a lot of people really suffer for a long time." And so I said, "Okay, fair enough." And we agreed, I would have final say over anything I said. And so in January, end of January, I went out there for a week. It's a week-long intensive, 8-hour a day treatment. I went from an abnormal fMRI scan at the beginning of the week in terms of blood flow in the brain to a completely normal one at the end of the week, which is, I was like 6-7 months into my recovery at that point. And like, I was so skeptical going in, because their website has all of these really amazing results on it. And I was like, I don't know if this is a scam. Like, I was real skeptical. And, I'm going for a week. Like, what can they possibly do in a week? And it's all non-invasive, like kind of physical therapy type things, physical and cognitive therapy. So it's, stand on a ball while pushing lights on a wall as they light up while carrying on a conversation type stuff. Pat your tummy or pat your head and rub your tummy kind of things. And I was like, I don't know, like, is it really going to make that big of a difference? And sure enough, like, yeah, abnormal scan to completely normal scan on Friday, from Monday to Friday. And I was already noticing like glimmers of changes in sort of my subjective experience, with my symptoms. And, they said, look, you might be even feel worse at the end of the week in terms of, we're going to work you really hard, and this is going to be exhausting, and we might make your symptoms worse, but it's okay. And they said, give it like a few months, up to 6 months, and you'll see the full benefits of the treatment. And sure enough, like, even by the end of the week, I could sort of start to see glimmers. One of the things that I didn't realize, but I wasn't dreaming, or at least wasn't remembering my dreams prior to treatment. And I started having really vivid nightmares on like day 3. And I went, okay, this is different. Like, I'll accept any change at this point. These aren't particularly pleasant, but
something.
like, yeah, hey, I'll take it. And even within a week or two, I was like, oh my God, like, I definitely feel better. I'm not 100%, I'm still getting massive headaches and stuff, but like, I can function at a different level than I could before. And it's just kept getting better and better. I've had a few setbacks here and there. But I'm now at the point where I can work full time again. I can be in front of a computer pretty much as long as I want, which was like, I couldn't be in front of screens at all for the first 6 months. It just gave me massive headaches. My brain would kind of shut down. And, so yeah, I'm still getting headaches, pretty much every day. But they're low level enough. They're not slowing me down, and I kind of know how to manage them and can do my thing. So it's great. Like, I feel like myself again, and I'm able to do what I love. So I feel very lucky.
Really
and
happy to hear that.
I feel super lucky that Cognitive FX, got me in for treatment the way they did, and were willing to cover the cost. I was ready to pay for it out of pocket. Unfortunately, most concussion care that's worth anything, insurance doesn't cover. It's really lacking. There's way less concussion specialty clinics out in the US than we need, and in the world in general. I mean, Cognitive FX treats 19 patients a week right now, is the maximum they can handle, and I would say half were from Europe. There were a number of folks like from the Netherlands that had flown all the way to the US for treatment, because they couldn't get sufficient treatment in Europe. So, it's really frustrating. I really want to see that change, because I was the person at the clinic who, to my surprise, it was the shortest time after my injury. There were folks there that had been dealing with their post-concussion syndrome for decades, and had only recently figured out that they could get treatment for it. They just kind of had given up. And that's a real shame, and it's not just adults, it's children as well. Like, how many kids, get concussions as a kid and then are just labeled the problematic kid who has anger issues, or the kid who just isn't good in school. And it's actually, concussion related eye issues, or it's, concussion related emotional regulation and autonomic nervous system regulation. And like, all of this stuff is fixable, but we don't have, at least in the US, and I would argue, worldwide, we are not good at evaluating concussions. We're not good at evaluating long-term concussion symptoms, which they call post-concussion syndrome, which is a fancy word for concussion symptoms that last more than 3 months. Concussion symptoms that don't get better, is really all that means. We're not good at evaluating it, and we're not good at treating it, despite the medical field knowing what the best treatment is. We have, in the past 30 years, it's changed significantly. And yet, most neurologists, even ones that say they have a specialty in concussions, are not using the latest research. They're using 30-year-old research that we know actually harms recovery and doesn't help it. So, I don't want to, I could talk about this all day, but I just sort of
Yeah.
want to say to people out there a couple things. One, if you get a concussion, don't take it lightly. Secondly, anybody that tells you to rest after a concussion, you can rest for 24 to 48 hours, and then you need to be up doing stuff. You need to be up going for a walk. You need to be trying to redo get back to the things in your life. I think it's one of the things that really impacted my concussion recovery was doing what they call Cocoon Therapy, which is dark room, no screens, no reading, et cetera, et cetera. And really it just kind of lets your brain stagnate, and you need to be up challenging your brain and getting that blood flowing again. And that's one of the biggest changes. And then two, if you have concussion symptoms that last a long time, you need to be getting into a specialty concussion clinic. And if any doctor that tells you to go back to cocooning after you're, a week out doesn't know what they're talking about, and you need to go find somebody else. And even if that means going and talking to Cognitive FX, they now have 2 clinics. They have one that I went to, the main one for people who have really long lasting symptoms, but they also have another one that's kind of Cognitive FX light that is specifically designed for people who have just had a concussion, and it's fully covered by most insurance. So, I'm not pitching them because, they're a sponsor because they got me in. It's just the people that I found that most know what they're doing in concussion recovery. And I'm sure there are others out there. I just don't know specifics. But don't settle. Don't settle for, a concussion. The reality is even though they're called mild traumatic brain injuries, they're brain injuries, and you really want to treat it seriously. And time is a factor, right? You want to be doing the things right away. I have an interview up on my second channel with Alina Fong, Dr. Alina Fong, who is one of the founders of Cognitive Effects. And one of the things we touch on in that interview is what should you do right away after getting a concussion. So definitely.
It was a great interview.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. She's amazing. She's really down to earth, and I think is very good at, she's very articulate and able to sort of explain where the state of current concussion recovery and what you should do if you have one. So, yeah.
I don't know how much this means to you because I'm very much an outsider, and I mean, we know each other from the length of this podcast.
Sure.
But if I'm looking at, as an outsider, your last couple of videos pre-injury was the folding iPhone, the 10,000 volts at altitude, and then the scanning electron microscope, which I found they were not in a channel, sometimes you worry that the channel will stagnate over time. But to me, they just kept getting better. So those were great videos.
Thank you.
Your MRI scan one was different format, so it's hard to judge it on its own merits. But the battle bots, it feels like it just picked up where the electron microscope left off.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm glad because I've noticed watching that, I just, breath in, breath out, strange parts is back is what I felt. And so if that's what you were aiming for, you nailed it. And
yes.
And I mean, if the future of your channel is more videos in this genre like you used to be doing, this is all I can ask for as a viewer. This is
That's
best
the
stuff.
goal. That's the goal. Just to get back to it here, COVID and the concussion have really been kind of a stumbling block here, but I'm full bore ahead at this point. And the big focus is getting back to doing ambitious engineering projects. One of my tasks for today is to go order a bunch of iPhones for something coming up, and then to get back to factory tours. So I really want to restart the factory tours, and I know that resonates with a lot of folks in the audience, and I love doing them. And it's something that I think we're finally at the point where it starts to make sense in terms of COVID and stuff. I've been real careful about not getting sick with COVID, particularly with the concussion symptoms. They don't. Long COVID and concussions don't stack very well. So I've just been real careful there.
I can attest. Long COVID is not great. I've had COVID in December, and since then, I recovered. Obviously, it hit me pretty hard, even though I was double vaccinated at the time, and now I'm boosted. But I still, the thing is, I've struggled for a couple of years with anxiety. And the
Yep.
problem is when I feel my anxiety coming up, it's now accompanied with breathlessness. So
Oh,
that's been the worst thing. And I always feel
yeah.
my like my ability to think has been taken away or reduced when I have the long COVID symptoms, to the point where I got myself a
Yep.
pulse oximeter because I thought I was not getting enough oxygen to the brain. Like that's what it
Yep.
feels like. And so, yeah, I would, 0 out of 10, do not recommend
Yeah.
COVID for the chance of long COVID. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Like it's bad.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I think it's far more widespread than we really understand right now. If
Oh,
I
100%.
can, I might make a
Yeah,
recommendation for you to try for those symptoms.
I'm all
Um,
ears.
Cognitive Effects has actually been trialing um, a similar treatment program that they use for post-concussion syndrome for people with long COVID, particularly the cognitive pieces. But what you might try is one of the key pieces of their treatment is it's like cardio exercise intervals done in a very specific way. So you do it with a heart rate monitor, and so it can be like a stationary bike or a treadmill or something like that. The goal is to I think we were doing like 45 seconds of really heavy effort, right? So get your heart rate as high as you can, and then stop completely and let your heart rate recover, and use sort of intentional breathing. They were having us breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 6, and hold it for 1, and then breathe in for 4. And when you first like out of breath after doing a heavy effort, you have to work towards that. But then once you get your breath under control, going back to that 4-6-1, and then as soon as you can get your heart rate down to sort of close to a resting level and your breath under control, then redo that effort and do that for 30 minutes. And the goal of that is to teach your body to re-regulate your autonomic nervous system. So probably when you're getting anxiety, your autonomic nervous system is kicking in, and it is misregulating your breath right now. And your heart rate probably is spiking too. And so
Yes,
the
it is
idea
actually.
of this is to actually train your heart rate to go up when you're under heavy effort, and then train it to come down when you're not under heavy effort, right? So to get that to re-regulate. And so for concussions, you get that like headache and brain fog is partly because and this is just my understanding, not a doctor, take this with a grain of salt.
None of us are doctors, or else
Right.
we'd be making a lot more money, folks.
Yeah,
So
exactly. But the problem with post-concussion syndrome is that your autonomic nervous system isn't working properly, and what it does is it just raises the heart rate and the blood pressure in your brain, and just holds it there, even when you're just sitting, and that causes headaches, and then it causes brain fatigue and brain fog as well. So you might try that. It's the worst thing that'll happen is you get in better shape. But
which
it's
is,
been
yeah,
one of the
who
things that's
cares?
really
Yeah.
helped me. And I know that they're using similar techniques on long COVID folks. So might be worth a shot.
When, not to get political, but when my
Sure.
local government said, you know what, it doesn't matter, even though the cases are still, there's still a lot of
Yeah.
them, we're just canceling all of the restrictions. And it hit me then that, well, other people don't care about other people's health, which,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, this is not a political podcast. So I said, I'm going to have to try to get into good shape. So I actually lost 40 pounds in the
Oh,
last
wow.
6 months in
Congratulations.
order
That's
to,
awesome.
thank you. And it was bad because eating was my, I'm a stress eater.
Yeah.
So for
Same
those
here.
listening, I'm 5'9". I was 225. Now I'm about 100. I hover around 190 or so.
Congratulations. That's
And
awesome.
thank you. And I'm aiming to go to 180. And it's just been hard because it's been, anxiety the last
Yep.
couple of weeks. And so, yeah, I'll definitely give this a shot because
Yep.
I really have no excuse not to try. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if it
Shouldn't
works,
really cause any damage. But
exactly.
it might really help. Um, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I hope it
Yeah,
works, and
absolutely.
if it works,
Me
you'll be
too.
getting a DM from me, and
Awesome.
I don't know. We'll
Awesome.
see.
And I would give it at
Um,
least like a month. Well, let's see. You probably should see some effect of like a couple of weeks of doing that. They had us doing it every day, like 5 days a week.
okay.
Like, and even at home, like it was a take home thing. And yeah, so you
Oh,
can try
interesting.
that.
Once a
Yeah.
day or multiple times a day?
Once a day.
Once
Yeah.
a day.
Once a
Okay.
day, five
I
days a
think I
week,
can
and then
manage
2
once
days
a
off.
day.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
It's
think I can
definitely a time
manage multiple
commitment.
times a day.
Yeah, for sure. No. Once a day. Once a day. I found it's best to do at the beginning of the day just because it gets my blood flowing in my brain for the rest of the day. Like I feel better. Um, just cognitively. Like if I'm struggling with like brain fog, it can really like reduce some of those symptoms. So yeah.
Well, there we go. So I'm going to give that a shot. I would also like everyone listening to this to go check out Scotty's videos. The newest video I think is just sort of like the hat on the channel because the very bleeding edge. Plus, it's BattleBots. Who doesn't like robots?
Yeah.
But he has a whole bunch of interesting things. Pretty much throw a dart at the screen. I don't think you're gonna hit a bad video, which is phenomenal. And you have a second channel as well, Stranger Parts, which is a little hard to find
Yep.
in the algorithm, but
Yes.
you probably have it
But it
linked
is
in your
linked off the
channel
main
page.
channel. Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Exactly.
will be linked in the description of this podcast as well, if for whatever reason my channel is easier to find than Scotty's.
Awesome.
Any closing thoughts for the people listening out there?
I don't think so. This has been great. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Dan.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Trust me. This is I cannot believe who I got to speak to today, and
Well, thanks.
it's awesome. And I
Yeah,
hope
it's been a pleasure.
I hope we keep in touch. And maybe if you have an
Absolutely.
extra hour to burn, you'll maybe want to come back for another episode in the future because there's so much
Sure.
more we could have covered.
Yeah, hit me up. Yeah, let me get a few more projects under my belt so we have some more good stuff to talk about.
And that, folks, is how you pressure someone into coming for a second episode. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Make sure to comment on one of his videos as well, telling him that you came from the podcast, because it'd be interesting to see how many people
Sure.
listened all the way to the end. And yeah, thanks for listening.